Hey, it's Lena, and today I'm coming at you with a book review. And this is video one of six in my Books That Changed My Reading Life series. Six books that didn't just move me, but rewired something in how I read, how I think, and what I go looking for in a story. And we are starting with Mitch Albom's The Five People You Meet in Heaven. So let's begin. Eddie is 83 years old, a war veteran with a ruined knee, and the head of maintenance at Ruby Pier, a seaside amusement park that he has spent his entire adult life failing to escape. He was supposed to leave, study engineering, build something. Instead, year after year, he stayed, inheriting his father's job the way you inherit a debt you didn't agree to, watching the park change around him while he stayed fixed in its place. On his birthday, a ride malfunctions. A cart swings loose. Below it stands a small girl frozen. Eddie runs toward her instead of away, and in that final act, he dies, believing with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent decades feeling invisible that his life amounted to very little. He wakes up in heaven, which is nothing like what he expected. Albom's heaven is not a destination of reward, not a garden or a celestial city. It is a reckoning, a sequence of five encounters with people whose lives were invisibly knotted to Eddie's own. A blue man from the sideshow of his childhood, whose death Eddie caused without knowing it, his commanding officer from the war, the woman the park was named for, his wife, Marguerite, and last, a small Filipino girl named Tala, whose presence brings the whole architecture of the novel crashing into its terrible, merciful resolution. What is radical about this book structure is that it operates entirely in reverse, not as a mystery working toward revelation, but as a life working backward toward meaning. Each encounter dismantles one of Eddie's certainties about his own failure, not by comforting him, but by expanding his field of view. The theological claim the novel quietly makes that no life is self contained, that every choice ripples outward through lives its maker can't see or account for, is one of the more intellectually serious ideas I've encountered dressed in accessible fiction. Albom is drawing on a concept with deep roots in both philosophy and theology. The idea that human existence is fundamentally relational, that personhood is constituted not in isolation, but through the web of effects we have on others, and most of which we will never know. What moves me most about this book in particular, and what I think gets underrated in conversations about it, is how seriously it takes Eddie's despair. Albom doesn't treat Eddie's conviction that his life was meaningless as a problem to be cheerfully corrected. He treats it as a genuine philosophical position, one that a man working the same maintenance job for 60 years would have every earthly reason to hold. And then he takes 60 years worth of invisible consequences and makes them visible one by one. The cumulative effect is devastating in the exact sense that word should be used. It levels something in you, and what it levels is a particular kind of cynicism about whether quiet, unglamorous service is worth anything at all. The prose itself is unadorned almost to the point of austerity, and I think that is a calculated choice. Albom knows the emotional payload in this material is already enormous. He doesn't need ornate sentences. What he needs is for nothing to stand between you and the feeling, and the clean, plain prose accomplishes exactly that. There is a sentence in the Marguerite section. I will not quote it because you should encounter it without preparation, that genuinely stopped me completely. That kind of writing, the kind that says a true thing in the simplest possible form, is harder to achieve than most literary ambition. The critique Albom most often faces, that his architecture is too visible, that you can see the machinery of sentiment at work, is worth examining honestly. I don't dismiss it at all. What I'd say in response is that there is a distinction between sentimentality and emotional sincerity, and that Albom consistently operates in the latter category, in my humble opinion. Sentimentality manufactures feeling through manipulation. Sincerity earns it through truth. The difference is real, and here it matters. The fifth encounter with Tala in particular is about guilt and the specific, complicated grace of having your worst fear about yourself answered, not with punishment, but with a different kind of understanding altogether. It is not sentimental, it is precise. There's also the criticism that the characters in this novel exist largely as instruments of Eddie's education rather than as full people with their own weight, and that is a limitation. The structure, once you've traced its pattern through the second encounter, becomes slightly predictable in its rhythm, even when the specific content surprises you. The book's ambition is deliberately narrow, which means it makes no attempt at the moral complexity that a longer, more sprawling work might reach for. This novel, in that sense, is a fable in the truest sense: beautiful, purposeful, and compressed, and fables have formal costs. I also want to say something about what this book gave me that I didn't know I needed, which was a reconsideration of what constitutes a life worth living. We are surrounded by cultural messaging that equates significance with visibility, with scale, with a kind of achievement that can be indexed and measured. Eddie's story is a sustained argument against that equation. The lesson isn't that ordinary lives are secretly grand. It's that significance and visibility were never the same thing to begin with, and that the reckoning happens elsewhere, on a different ledger than the one we were taught to keep. And so, with all of that said, it goes without saying that I give the 5 people you meet in heaven 5 stars, and I mean it every time I return to this book, which is pretty often. The invisible scaffolding underneath an ordinary life is a subject of great literature when it's handled well, and here it is handled beautifully. That's where we begin. And so that leads me to you. Have you read this book yet? And or are you planning to? I'd love to know your thoughts, so leave them down in the comment section below. I'd love to interact with you. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome. Stay awesome. And I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.